So, Vic, you and I don't know each other that well. We met at a Praxis event early this year, but we really haven't spent time together. And so we're supposed to interview each other, and it's kind of like getting to know, should we be friends in front of 250 other people? And so I did the first thing that I usually do when I'm going to meet somebody new is I went on Vic's LinkedIn, and amazingly, under his About, which is really the first thing that you have on your LinkedIn, it says Christian, husband, entrepreneur, sour candy lover, I think. But that is just putting your faith right out there to be the first thing on your LinkedIn profile. So I would just love to hear a little bit about what kind of prompted you to do that and what your journey has been kind of being out with your faith.
Yeah. So like many people, I imagine, in the room, have spent time trying to walk this tightrope of expressing and representing my faith versus, I think, in certainly the Bay Area, if you're monotheist of any kind, the assumption is that you're illogical, you don't believe in science, and you might try to convert me. And so where is this line? And when I started Fivestars, it was because I was thinking about being a missionary, and I felt God clearly say, startup is your mission field, start a company. And so we would do things like I would pray over the whole company during all hands and stuff like that. And at some point, people came up to me and they're like, hey, Vic, glad you do this thing, but it makes me feel kind of awkward. Could you stop doing it or whatever? And I was always trying to calibrate, right? Like what's too far and what's okay. And I actually got this great piece of advice from Pat Gelsinger's EA. So I was asking him for advice, but then on the way out, when I was walking with his assistant, I was like, how does he get away with saying, like, I run this church of 17,000 congregants, that's VMware. And she basically said he does a good job of representing it as just an authentic expression of who he is versus as something he's trying to impress upon me or like trying to convince me of. And I realized the only thing in the Bay Area more powerful than like whatever than stereotype that if you're monotheist you're crazy is like this authentic express yourself you be you thing, your truth. Like great, so if it's just like my truth, then actually that's like a get out of jail free card to just say and do quite a lot as long as I'm just saying I or me. And anyway, so that I think was a very freeing realization. All right, so let's see. So I know when we were discussing, this topic came up of what are the ways that our faith actually expresses in our day-to-day work, and particularly what were some of the momentous situations that, I don't know, would be fun stories for us to share and people to hear. So curious what comes to mind.
Well, I think that I've really come to see how God uses difficult moments and has used difficult moments in my career to shape me. And that question that we were just reflecting on, I think one of the challenges for me has been that so much of my identity has been tied up in my title. And I've had the chance to work for these amazing companies. And so I always have struggled with feeling like I had to work really hard to prove myself and that, I was only as good as how people perceived me. And that got really challenged when I was working for Nintendo and I was the head of sales and marketing. It's a job that many people would be really excited to have, right? And one of the responsibilities that I had was speaking at a huge conference called E3 and speaking in front of thousands of people about Nintendo's lineup of games. And coming off stage, I thought I'd done a pretty good job, and I actually felt like speaking was one of my strengths, and I'd made it through. And then, as soon as I get off stage, the internet just lights up with all of this criticism of me, and really pointed, ugly criticism of, just being too exuberant, and like not caring about serious gamers and not really understanding gaming myself. And it was so public and so ugly. And I felt so much shame and embarrassment. I felt like I had let down my team. I felt like I had let down the company. I felt like I had let down my 8-year-old son, who I was afraid was going to read about his mom. And, God really used that time to just humble me, but also to have me turn to him and say, Cammie, your identity, what I care about is not your public persona. I care about who you're becoming, not who people see you as being in public. And that was just, even though I'd been involved in church communities, I had been, definitely a believer for a number of years. That was a moment that really started to just change how I thought about myself and how I thought about God and his love for me. And like, in some ways freed me up to be more open about my faith at work, because I realized that, maybe like you, that it's just that was more important than what my business card said.
I'm a pretty avid gamer myself, and I understand how toxic gamers are. I have witnessed some of these roastings before.
It can be a humbling environment, but I think also God made us. He knows us intimately. He knew that my self-sufficiency and pride was one of the things that he needed to help me wrestle with. Mm-hmm. So how about you? What's been a crucible moment that you've gone through?
I think there's the one that comes to mind first is kind of a similar idea to, I think, where what you shared, this idea of the world might have something to say about us, but ultimately, like, whose voice are we listening to most, or who do we belong to most? And there was a slightly different but sort of same idea type situation that was happening to us early Fivestars. We were raising an early round of capital, and basically two billionaires that, I've never met billionaires before in my 20s. They sat me down and they basically said, if you don't let us invest in your company, we are going to copy it and crush you. And not something, easy to hear at the time, but I got together with my co-founder, and it was one of those moments where we sat down and looked at each other and said, like, what do we really believe, that we work for the God of the universe? Do we really believe that it's his voice and authority that matters? And it was one of these defining moments, because we decided, all right, we're just going to go back and tell them to pound sand. And we did. And they ended up copying us and trying to replicate the company and all sorts of stuff. But, it's not supposed to be a prosperity gospel story. This one happens to work out, and we happened to beat them, which was great. But I think that situation left a lot of deep learnings and repercussions in how we would then continue running the company after that.
Yeah.
How much time do we have? I'm trying to figure out what questions to ask. Nobody? Okay.
I think we got about
I'm just going to keep
10 more
plowing
minutes.
on until... let's see. So I'm curious, along the lines of what you just shared, what were the continuing repercussions of those lessons? Like, how did it show up, and what were ways that those learnings impacted then how you operated in the workplace?
Yeah, I think that as time has gone on, I've just been able to just lean on God more and keep him more central. When I was moving, when I took the job at Duolingo, I moved to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, because that's where the company was headquartered, and I wanted to really kind of be able to develop the right relationship with the CEO. And I just had this image in my head of concentric circles, 3 circles, and keeping God at the center, and then keeping my family, who frequently got sloppy thirds from me, honestly, in a lot of my career, in the next layer, and then work being in the outer layer. And I lived in an apartment for the first few months of my time there. And it was awesome because there was a beautiful cathedral right out my window. And then Duolingo was right behind that. So it was this just manifestation of stay grounded in what matters, Cammie. And there were times, there was a really challenging moment that I went through at Duolingo that I was able to navigate in kind of a different way and hold a little more lightly because of my trust in God, which was some of you may be familiar, Duolingo has a really popular social media presence. And yeah, I had hired the woman and empowered her to put together this social media, particularly our TikTok presence. And had just given her a lot of freedom because you have to do that if you're going to move at the speed of culture. And so she didn't have to get approval from me for the content that she put up. And so one day I get a bunch of Slack messages from some believers in the company saying, have you seen the latest post? And so I quickly went and looked, and it was a post where she was really trying to be supportive of an organization that was very progressive and DEIB, but in the way she did it, it was very hurtful to people of faith, and particularly to some employees in the company who knew of my faith. And so I got her and got a couple of these employees together just so she could hear from their heart and their story about why it was hurtful to them. And then I did a Slack post. I asked her to take the content down, and I did a Slack post asking, just explaining that I didn't feel like it really represented the brand, and that also was hurtful to some people of faith in the company. And that got such blowback. By that time, the company was big enough that a lot of people didn't know me personally, and so they really saw it as kind of inappropriate. They, just attributed a lot of beliefs to me that I actually don't have. And I was able to navigate that without a whole lot of anxiety because I had prayed about it. I felt that it was right for me to speak out. And also, I had the people that I really cared about in the company, the people who knew me and knew my heart, and really kind of came to defend me. And so this whole, as you said, just living our faith authentically and knowing that God will be there in these tough times. I've been able to hold on to that and therefore not get so stressed.
I'm curious how that resolved, particularly with all the folks that were, torches and pitchforks in that situation.
Yeah.
And also maybe what you felt like the necessary conditions were to allow you to actually do that, to stand up and say something, because that on the surface, I imagine would look very scary to a lot of people.
Yeah, so it resolved as most social media things do with, there was a lot of conversation about it for a week or so. But then what was most important to me is that the people who were directly involved, particularly the woman who had posted it, where she knew that it was all okay, and she knew I had her back as well. And so it died down, and we're all still friends, and as most of those things do. If we just keep our eyes on Jesus and, ask for his wisdom and guidance, I think these things work out. Yeah. How about you? Is there another time that really sticks out in your mind of having to make a difficult decision?
One of the, concepts maybe that come to mind that when I think about your story and I think about you, I imagine throughout your tenure at Duolingo, you did a lot of things, right? And same at Nintendo, but there's these little moments that really jump out. That's what the story you're telling now. And I think what strikes me about that and what kind of mirrors the thought in my mind is one of the key turning points for me was this thought of, if I really believe that my boss that I work for is the God of the universe, and he's a lot bigger, then it's very contrived and frankly silly for me to think I know what he's doing with my company. To think like, oh, I'm building a company for God, we're building this product, we're going to influence all these people. I have no clue. Maybe the most valuable thing Fivestars does is like a customer support call that happens between two people on a bad day, and throughout the next 1,000 years of reverberations or any other thing, that's why God had this company exist, right? And also similarly, if it's a huge company or a small company, how can we even begin to see the real kingdom impact of that company? Just because something has a massive amount of scale in worldly terms doesn't mean it has hardly any scale in kingdom terms, and certainly beyond today. I guess that's just the thought that comes to mind when you share that story, because it's of all the things that you did, of the tens of millions of people who use the product, and lots of other things I'm also sure it was great. It's sort of this type of story, that comes out.
Yeah, and a good friend of mine says love is a KPI. And I think that is so powerful. And I think that's what we are called to in our work, is we are called to show love, to show it in the way that we do customer service, to show it in the kinds of products that we build, and certainly to show it in the way that we interact with people in the company, people on our team.
Yeah, I think one other thought along these lines that was kind of interesting for me was as we sold the company, and then I was at the choir for a while. My last day, after 13 years of this journey of fighting and sweat and blood and tears and all this stuff, building this thing, it's my last day. I'm sort of saying goodbye, and we had an open door Bible study for many years at the company, and this prayer group that we were running. And at times the prayer group was 40 people, and we would do worship, and there was a worship leader and someone who could play the guitar and stuff. And other times it was two of us, just holding down the fort. And on that last day, it just happened that our weekly prayer group was scheduled on that day, and so it was just me and this group of people, some who'd been at the company for 10 years and some who were just there for a little bit. And I just got this weird feeling from Dad, from God, that was I'm just so pleased and proud of this group that's meeting right here, my adorable little kids, gathering in this prayer group. And I especially felt this sense of, and amidst the backdrop of funding and employees and all this stuff, right? He's just happy about the prayer group, and I especially got this feeling, and maybe this is sort of a encouragement or thought for people in the crowd, but that the times when the prayer group was 40 people and more of the company was going, that was great. And it's you can't really even fit in a conference room, so it's just kind of an interesting thing that we're sorting through. But the most precious times were when it was two of us, just two of us holding down the fort, Friday morning, because no one else had showed up to the prayer group, but we're here, we're just going to keep praying.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's one of the beautiful things that God does when we are more open about our faith at work, is he just gives us a community of people. And so it's been so important to me to have other believers that, I could send a Slack to and say, hey, I've got a really important presentation. Can you be praying for me? Or to have someone who may see me in a difficult meeting and come by and say, hey, you really handled yourself with grace during that meeting. And, I think there, particularly as leaders, there's ways that we can just bring that authentic part of ourselves to work. One of the things that I've done for many, many years is I always start staff meetings with everybody sharing a personal update and a professional update. And I would find it's pretty easy in a personal update to be like, I went to the most awesome retreat with my church this weekend, just to kind of bring it into conversation very, very naturally.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what you're describing, I also feel like is almost like the greatest witness, or the path to witness. It's like this thought that the truest thing about all of us is God's fingerprints on our soul and on our heart, how he stitched us together in the womb. And when we show up in the workplace with, the Instagram curated self, the like, oh, my weekend was fine self, like this thing, then actually it's no longer us that people are, it's just us that people are seeing. Like, it's not God that they're seeing, because we're plastering over it with all this manicured stuff. And so, yeah, like the situations where you bring in like the rawness, or the marital problem, or your struggle at work, I think as a leader, creating space for that like is almost like one of the key ways that then people actually connect in the brokenness and the vulnerability, and then you kind of end up praying together or witnessing in some other way. I just think it's such a cool thing that as a leader you can implement. Like, okay, 5 minutes of every meeting we're going to start with like a real update, not like a fake update.
Yeah, just showing people that they're important. Like, our world needs that so much today. There's so much brokenness and so much hurt. And just to take the time to really know the people that you work with and around, and to ask some questions and show your care, I think that's as powerful a witness as you can find.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No more dramatic warm on your filters, okay, when you're posting on Instagram. A question for both of you. When you were starting out, younger in your career, dating back to whatever that is, and there's people in the room that are in that space right now, what would you go back and tell yourself now, as a Christ follower and a business leader, that you would go back and tell your younger self, this is what I know? Maybe you guys should share the mic there.
I would tell myself to rest more. I really would. And when I think about how little margin I allowed in my life through many years, and the opportunities that I missed for relationship and just for lingering. And I love the way that John Mark Comer talks about rest, that rest isn't sleep. It is finding those things that delight your soul and therefore delight our Father. And I wish that I am proud of all the things that I've accomplished in my career and also as a mom. But I think that it could have been even better if I had taken more time to rest.
That's good. That's honest. Thank you. Vic, what about you?
Well, when I was young, I'll just speak for you. Like, you're just kind of full of yourself, I'm going to go out. God, what do you want me to do for you? What do you want me to do for the kingdom, right? Like, how can I work really hard and accomplish some big thing? And it's like, he's the God of the universe. He doesn't need jack squat from any of us, right? If he wanted to instantly do something, he could just do it. And I think one of the most profound things for me, especially like that I realized later on, it's like, why then does God, well, number one, like, involve us, right? I'm in Dad's workshop. He's a master craftsman, and he's got me, this little toddler, helping him with his table. One, it's like just full of myself to even think I could mess up the table, right? If he's a master craftsman, if I like nick it or something, he'll fix it. It's his project. It's his table. And then the second thought is like, well, so why am I in the workshop? I'm not in the workshop because he needs me to like hold a little hammer or like hand him some screws. I'm in the workshop because he finds me adorable. Right? He finds us all adorable. And so the number one thing I can do at work and at home is to like just lean into that with Dad and just enjoy our time together.
That's good. That's a quotable. God doesn't need jack squat from me. Vic Ho. Okay, Cammie, share about your one-on-ones with your team, the repersonal development.
Yeah, so again, I believe that as leaders, a huge part of our job is just to take the time to really get to know the people around us. And so I have always been really intentional with my one-on-ones, with skip levels, and with carving time out for just open discussions about their development, about their hopes and their dreams, because if you don't do that, one-on-ones just get very transactional. Yeah. So I just have very specific development discussions with my direct reports. I try to do it once a month, and with my skip levels about once a quarter.
That's great. Vic, a question for you about influencing others. You at 5-Star, you sat in a role where you had a big team and you were doing a lot of different things. And talking about leadership versus influence and influencing others, what did that look like for you? And what do you wish you could have done better, or what did you learn along the way in influencing in your leadership?
So one only semi-related thing I'm just going to piggyback on real quick is I just think what Cammie just said is so cool and so easy to gloss over. Like, I know I did a lot, so maybe this is what I could do better part. When a lot of people do skip levels, well, first, it's already great that you do skip levels, right? People are like, ooh, you're doing skip levels. Like, that's good. You're a hands-on leader. You care. But most of the time I'm doing skip levels, it's to, like, look for dirt in the organization, right? It's like, what leader is, like, not treating their employees well? What leader is, like, not actually cascading the strategy? But like, what Cammie just said is I do, in a lot of my one-on-ones and my skip levels, like, I focus it on personal development. And I think that's just so extraordinary. Like, you're getting skip levels, and your leader is spending the time asking you what your hopes and dreams are, then they're going to actually help follow up on, like, your development and your career. That's like such a countercultural example of Christ to me versus, like, what every other blog post talks about when, like, you're doing skip levels. So I think that's one thing I did more of, and it's actually been a core takeaway for me of what my next company should look like. I think one of the biggest things related to that, and why as I introspect I behave that way, is just fear. Like, I'm afraid that if I ask these people constantly, what are you hoping for? Like, how fast do you want to grow? That 5-Stars isn't growing enough for them. And as a result, they'll leave the company, right? Or they're going to ask for too much money, because every time you ask people, what do you want? They ask for more money. And you're like, well, I don't have more money, right? And so it becomes this, like, dangerous question over time. Mm-hmm. But I think if I were less afraid, if I believed more deeply that, like, the God of the universe is the one in control, and, like, who gives a shit what happens to this thing? Like, I work for him and I'm his son. I think I would have much more the mentality of, like, how do I grow employees out of this company? It would be great if I could grow people faster than the company grew, and maybe that doesn't happen. Maybe the company goes really fast, and then they have great opportunities here. But either way, I think a stronger, deeper emphasis on just the development of each person, and each person as maybe the core value, product, whatever. Like, not just what can they do in service of this organization.
That's good. Oh, we're getting great quotables from Vic. Hashtag. No hashtag. Thank you guys for being here. Before I have you leave the stage, one last word that you guys want to share. Each of you just share just a parting word to the audience here.
So I would say that think about your work as an act of worship. And if you can approach it that way every day and just realize that it really is an opportunity to show a little bit of heaven and what heaven will be to the people that you serve at work, just by showing them love, showing them care, showing them respect.
Very similar idea, and I'm just gonna, there's an application of it that comes to mind. So how many of you here would stand up a one-on-one with your boss? You'd just be like, didn't feel like going, so I just kind of no-showed them today. You probably wouldn't do that, right? But, like, why do we no-show the one-on-one for our real boss all the time in the morning, right? And that was, like, one of the core thoughts of, like, if I don't have my one-on-one, how do you even know what to really work on for today? You think it's the thing on your to-do list, but what if it's, like, to have lunch with someone? What if it's, like, actually the HR issue you're trying to avoid is, like, the real kingdom thing for the day? And so if I wouldn't no-show my boss, how do I just no-show the God of the universe? I'm like, it's cool. Like, and you just kind of gloss over it. So that was and I still do that all the time, just to be clear. But like, it's a convicting thought. Like, if I no-show him, maybe the system I should put in place is then I have to cancel my first meeting to do that instead, because wouldn't I rather no-show my first meeting than God?
That's good. That's good. Can you guys thank Cammie and Vic for this? That was a fantastic interview. Thank you guys very much.
Thank you.